John had been a park ranger on the Appalachian Trail for 2 years, a job that had thrown just about every challenge his way. Lost hikers stumbling through the undergrowth, wild animals rustling in the night, late-night campers thinking they could outsmart the rules, even pranksters trying to spook their friends with fake bear tracks. He'd handled it all with a calm head and a steady hand. But there was something about patrolling the trails after dark that never sat right with him. It wasn't the bears or the rocky paths, it was the way the forest seemed to shift, to breathe, to watch once the sun dipped below the horizon. Some of the older rangers called it a different world after sunset, their voices low as if they didn't want the trees to overhear. John had always nodded along, chalking it up to campfire tales, until one night last fall changed everything he thought he knew. The Appalachian Trail is a ribbon of wilderness that can stretch for days without a hint of human life, but John's regular patrol area included a stretch near a steep ravine where the rules were ironclad: no camping, no fires, no exceptions. Too many accidents over the years, hikers slipping into the dark drop, twisted ankles, broken bones, had made it a no-go zone after dusk. If he caught anyone there, it was his job to shoo them off, no questions asked. That night though, as the clock ticked past midnight, it wasn't a rogue camper that caught his eye. It was something no amount of training could have braced him for, something that still haunts his quiet moments. He'd been out on his solo patrol for a couple of hours, the cold October air biting at his fingertips as he walked. The only sound was the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots, a steady rhythm that kept him grounded in the stillness. Then, out of nowhere, he saw it, a faint, flickering glow weaving through the trees, just off the main trail. At first, he blinked, thinking his tired eyes were playing tricks after hours in the dark. The light was soft, almost ghostly, more a shimmer than a beam, and the forest around it was eerily silent. No owls hooting, no wind rustling the branches, no small critters scurrying through the brush, just a void of sound that made his skin prickle. John kept moving, his mind ticking through possibilities. Maybe someone had ignored the rules and set up a camp, a flickering fire breaking the no-flame decree. It wouldn't be the first time he'd caught a stubborn hiker bending the regulations, thinking the trail's vastness hid their tracks. But as he edged closer, doubt crept in. The light didn't have the warm, steady glow of a campfire, nor the sharp cut of a modern headlamp. It flickered and swayed like an old lantern, the kind you'd see in a museum, not on a trail in the middle of nowhere. Who'd lug something like that out here? He stepped off the path, his flashlight angled low to keep his position discreet. The glow seemed to drift deeper into the woods, teasing him forward, like it had a mind of its own. Against his better judgment, he followed, his boots sinking into the soft earth as the trees closed in. The light danced just out of reach, flashing through the branches, always too far to make out clearly. Every time he thought he'd lost it, it flared again, a little farther ahead, pulling him along like a moth to a flame. John prided himself on being rational. 2 years on the job had honed that instinct, but this defied logic. No one should be out here, not in this restricted zone, and certainly not with some antique light. The deeper he went, the heavier the air felt, pressing against his chest like a warning. His breathing echoed too loudly in the silence, and his heart thudded in a way that wasn't just from the uneven terrain. The forest was different here. Denser, wilder, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. Branches snagged at his jacket, roots twisted underfoot, and still, that light kept moving. He told himself he'd just check it out, make sure no one was starting a fire hazard, then head back. Simple. Routine. But nothing about this felt routine. Then, without warning, the light vanished. John froze, scanning the darkness, his ears straining for any clue. Had they seen him? Doused their lantern to hide? He stood still, waiting, and that's when he noticed it. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was absolute. No crickets, no breeze, nothing but the sound of his own pulse hammering in his ears. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, watching him back. He took a cautious step, then another, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. Just as he started to relax, the light flickered back to life. Farther away now, taunting him, daring him to keep going. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back. But the ranger in him, the part that needed answers, pushed him forward. He had to know. The trees seemed to lean in as he moved, their gnarled limbs brushing his shoulders like skeletal fingers. The underbrush thickened, forcing him to duck and weave, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Then, abruptly, the light stopped. It hung there, suspended in the black, a faint, flickering pulse that felt alive. John crept closer, his throat tight, trying to stay calm despite the sweat beading on his forehead. He was just a few yards away when it blinked out again, plunging him into total darkness. His heart lurched, and he fumbled to crank his flashlight to full power, sweeping it through the trees. Nothing, no movement, no figure, just endless trunks and shadows. "All right, whoever you are, you got me," he muttered, his voice jarring in the stillness. No answer came. He turned slowly, scanning one last time, ready to call it quits and head back. That's when he saw it, a glint, low and metallic, catching his beam. He stepped closer and stopped dead. Hanging from a low branch, just a few feet away, was an old, rusted lantern. It looked ancient, its glass panes smeared with grime, its handle pitted with age. It swayed gently, as if stirred by a breeze, but the air was still as death. There were no footprints, no snapped twigs, no sign anyone had been here. Just the lantern, alone and impossible. John stared, his mind racing. How had it gotten here? Who, or what, had been carrying it? He stood there, rooted, for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. His ranger training kicked in eventually. He couldn't leave an open flame unattended, not out here. With a shaky hand, he reached for it. The metal was ice cold, heavier than it looked, and as he twisted the knob to extinguish the flame, the darkness swallowed everything. He set it back on the branch, wiping his palms on his pants, and backed away, his eyes darting over his shoulder. The trek back to the main trail was a blur. Every few steps, he glanced behind, half expecting that light to flare up again. By the time he reached the path, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in soft grays. He didn't tell anyone about it, not right away. What would he say? That he'd chased a ghost light through the woods? The next day, he returned, searching for evidence, a campsite, tracks, anything. But the spot was empty, pristine, like no one had ever been there. John still patrols that stretch, though he's never seen the lantern again. But some nights, when he's alone in the dark, he catches a flicker through the trees. Just a glimpse, a tease. He tells himself it's his flashlight reflecting, or another ranger passing by. Deep down, though, he knows better. Something's out there, waiting, and he's not sure he wants to find out what. Mark reached the gravel lot where his truck sat alone, its faded red paint barely visible through the lingering wisps of fog. His hand shook slightly as he fumbled with the keys, the metallic jingle cutting through the stillness. He slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it, a reflex from years of needing to feel secure after a call gone sideways. The engine roared to life, a comforting growl that drowned out the memory of that scream still echoing in his head. He didn't waste time peeling out of the lot, the tires kicking up dust as he put the trailhead in his rearview mirror. But the unease didn't fade with distance. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he replayed the morning in his mind. The figure, motionless, featureless, dissolving into the fog like smoke. The scream, too perfect, too deliberate, like it was meant to lure him off the path. He'd faced plenty of chaos as a firefighter. Collapsing roofs, panicked victims, the suffocating heat of a blaze. But this was something else. It wasn't just danger, it was wrong, like the trail itself had turned against him. He was halfway down the winding mountain road when he noticed it. A faint tapping sound, soft but insistent, coming from the back of the truck. At first, he thought it was a loose tool rolling around in the bed, something he'd tossed in there after his last shift. He ignored it, focusing on the road, but the tapping grew louder, more rhythmic. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Like someone was testing the metal, feeling it out. He glanced in the side mirror, expecting to see nothing but the empty bed. Instead, he caught a glimpse of something, a shadow, low and hunched, moving just out of sight. Mark slammed on the brakes, the truck lurching to a stop on the shoulder. His heart pounded as he twisted in his seat, craning to see through the back window. Nothing. The bed was empty, tools, tarp, spare tire, all undisturbed. He rubbed his eyes, chalking it up to exhaustion, the fog still messing with his head. "Get it together," he muttered, restarting the engine. But as he pulled back onto the road, the tapping started again, sharper now, like nails on steel. He didn't stop this time. He pushed the truck faster, the speedometer creeping past what was safe on these curves. The tapping kept pace, a maddening counterpoint to the engine's hum. By the time he hit the outskirts of town, it stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of his own ragged breathing. He pulled into the first gas station he saw, a run-down place with flickering lights and a single pump. The normalcy of it, cracked pavement, the faint smell of diesel, felt like a lifeline. He stepped out, legs shaky, and checked the truck bed again. Still nothing. No marks, no scratches, just the same old rust spots. Inside the station, he grabbed a coffee, more for something to hold than to drink, and lingered by the counter. The clerk, a wiry guy with a patchy beard, barely looked up from his phone. Mark hesitated, then asked, "You ever hear anything weird about the trail up there? Near the clearing?" The clerk shrugged, eyes still glued to his screen. "Folks get lost sometimes. Fog's a bitch." "Why, you see something?" Mark forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Just spooked myself, I guess." He didn't mention the figure, or the scream, or the tapping that had followed him down the mountain. The clerk didn't press, and Mark was glad for it. He paid and headed back to the truck, but as he climbed in, he noticed something new. A faint handprint on the passenger window, smudged and damp, like it had been pressed there from the outside. He hadn't seen anyone near the truck. The lot was empty. He wiped it away with his sleeve, telling himself it was condensation, a trick of the moisture in the air. But as he drove home, the feeling of being watched clung to him, heavy and unshakable. Back at his small cabin on the edge of town, he locked the doors, another old habit, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee he still hadn't touched. The morning replayed in fragments. The figure's stillness, the scream's echo, the tapping's persistence. He'd always trusted his instincts, honed by years of split-second decisions, but now they were screaming at him to stay away from that trail. The day stretched on, and he tried to distract himself, cleaning his gear, flipping through a book he didn't read. But every creak of the house made him jump. Every shadow in the corner of his eye felt like that figure waiting to reappear. By dusk, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his old trail map, spread it out on the table, and traced the path he'd taken. The clearing wasn't marked as anything special, just a wide spot between ridges, no history, no name. He'd hiked it dozens of times before without a hitch. So why now? What had changed? That night, sleep didn't come easy. He lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle the trees outside, half expecting to hear that tapping again. Around midnight, he jolted awake, though he couldn't say why. The room was dark, silent, but the air felt thick, like someone had just left it. He reached for the lamp, flicking it on, and scanned the room. Empty. Then he heard it, a faint tap-tap from the window. His blood ran cold as he turned to look. The glass was clear, the yard beyond it lit faintly by moonlight. No one was there. But on the sill outside, barely visible, was a single wet handprint, glistening like it had just been made. Mark didn't sleep after that. He sat up, lights on, waiting for dawn. The trail had let him go, but something, or someone, hadn't. And deep down, he knew it wasn't finished with him yet. Sarah stood frozen in the clearing, her heart pounding as the whispers faded into the stillness. The forest around her felt alive, watching her with unseen eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to keep moving. Standing still wouldn't get her back to the main trail. With a renewed sense of determination, she picked up her pack and started down the faint trail she'd spotted earlier, hoping it would lead her somewhere familiar. But as she walked, the trail seemed to twist and turn, leading her deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the sunlight. The air grew cooler, and a sense of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was following her every step. Suddenly, she noticed something strange: markings on the trees. They were crude symbols, etched into the bark with what looked like a knife. Some were simple crosses, others more intricate patterns. She'd never seen anything like them before, and they sent a shiver down her spine. Were they warnings? Or perhaps signs left by other hikers? She didn't know, but they added to the growing sense of dread. As she continued, the trail led her to a small, dilapidated cabin. It was hidden among the trees, its wood weathered and gray. The windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to approach. Part of her wanted to investigate, to see if there was anything inside that could help her find her way. But another part screamed at her to turn back, to get as far away from this place as possible. Curiosity won out. She stepped closer, peering through the broken window. The inside was dark, but she could make out the outlines of old furniture, a table, a chair, a rusted stove. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. She pushed the door open, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The air inside was musty, thick with the scent of decay. She took a few steps in, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. That's when she saw it. A journal, lying open on the table. Its pages were yellowed, the writing faded. She picked it up, flipping through the entries. They were dated years ago, chronicling the experiences of someone who had lived here. The last entry caught her eye. "I can't stay here anymore. The whispers are getting louder, and I've seen them, shadows in the trees. They're coming for me." A chill ran through her. She dropped the journal, backing away. The whispers she'd heard earlier, were they the same ones mentioned in the journal? And who were they? Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She had to get out of here, now. She stumbled out of the cabin, her breath coming in short gasps. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees looming like silent sentinels. She started running, desperate to find her way back. But the trail was gone, swallowed by the undergrowth. Panic set in as she realized she was lost again, with no idea which direction to go. That's when she heard it, a soft, melodic whisper, just like before. It seemed to be coming from all around her, beckoning her deeper into the woods. She tried to resist, to block it out, but it was insistent, pulling at her like a siren's call. Against her better judgment, she found herself following it, drawn by an unseen force. The whispers led her to a clearing, larger than the one before. In the center stood a circle of stones, arranged in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Inside the circle, the ground was bare, as if nothing could grow there. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart pounding. As she stepped into the circle, the whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence. She looked around, trying to make sense of it all. That's when she saw movement in the trees. A shadow, darting between the trunks. She spun around, but it was gone. Then another shadow, on the opposite side. She was surrounded. Fear gripped her as she realized she wasn't alone. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response, just the rustling of leaves. She took a step back, then another, until she was outside the circle. The shadows seemed to retreat, melting into the forest. She didn't wait to see if they'd return. She turned and ran, her feet pounding on the forest floor. Hours passed as she stumbled through the woods, exhaustion weighing her down. Just when she thought she couldn't go on, she saw a glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged within her as she pushed forward, breaking through the underbrush. There, before her, was the main trail, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. She collapsed to her knees, tears of relief streaming down her face. She'd made it. But even as she sat there, catching her breath, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her from the depths of the forest. She knew she'd never forget this experience, and she'd never venture off the main trail again. Emily tightened the laces of her hiking boots, a familiar ritual that grounded her before every trek. The Appalachian Trail was her haven, a sprawling network of paths she'd explored for over 10 years. She knew its twists and turns, the way the sunlight dappled through the trees in early morning, the earthy scent of moss after rain. To her, the trail was a living thing, an old friend that welcomed her back each time she returned. That crisp autumn day, she'd chosen a route she loved, a quiet stretch where the leaves were beginning to blaze with color, and the air carried the sharp bite of coming winter. She set out alone from the trailhead, her car the only one in the gravel lot, and smiled at the solitude ahead. For the first hour, the hike was everything she'd hoped. The crunch of her boots on fallen leaves mingled with the distant calls of birds, and a gentle breeze rustled the canopy overhead. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd logged countless miles, her pack light on her shoulders, her mind clear. This was why she came here, to shed the weight of the world and let the forest wrap her in its embrace. Then, something caught her eye. She stopped mid-stride, her gaze settling on a tree just off the path. Carved into its bark was a symbol, a rough circle bisected by 3 jagged lines. It wasn't a trailblaze, those were precise, painted marks meant to guide hikers. This was crude, almost frantic, as if scratched in haste. She stepped closer, running her fingers over the grooves. Maybe kids messing around, she thought, or some hiker leaving a quirky signature. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, intrigued but not yet uneasy. Shrugging, she pressed on. A few hundred yards later, she saw another symbol, similar but not identical, etched into a gnarled oak. Then another, on a birch further ahead. They seemed to form a pattern, veering off the main trail into a denser part of the forest she rarely explored. Her curiosity stirred. She'd always prided herself on knowing the trail's secrets, and this felt like a challenge. With a glance back at the familiar path, she decided to follow the markings, confident she could retrace her steps. The forest shifted as she ventured deeper. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches weaving a thick ceiling that dimmed the sunlight to a muted glow. The air thickened, carrying a faint metallic tang she couldn't place. The cheerful chatter of birds faded, replaced by an oppressive quiet that pressed against her ears. She noticed more symbols now, appearing on nearly every tree she passed, their shapes growing more intricate, circles within circles, lines twisting into spirals. They seemed to point her onward, like silent guides pulling her into the unknown. Then, she heard it, a soft, fleeting sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. She froze, tilting her head to listen. It was faint, barely audible over the rustle of leaves, but it was there. "Hello," she called, her voice sounding small and swallowed by the stillness. No answer came, just the whisper again, clearer now, though the words remained indistinct. Her pulse quickened. "It's just the breeze," she told herself, "or maybe other hikers nearby, their voices warped by the trees." She was a rational woman, not prone to flights of fancy, but a flicker of doubt crept in. Against her better judgment, she pressed forward, drawn by the whispers and the symbols. The path, more a suggestion than a trail now, grew wilder, choked with brambles and vines that snagged at her legs. She pushed through, her boots sinking into soft earth, her breath visible in the cooling air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving around her like threads of sound. She strained to understand them, catching fragments, her name, perhaps, or a plea to follow. Her stomach tightened, but she couldn't turn back now. Something compelled her, a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable pull she couldn't shake. After what felt like an eternity, the trees parted, and she stumbled into a clearing. It was a perfect circle, about 20 feet across, ringed by smooth, moss-covered stones. In the center stood a flat slab of rock, weathered and ancient, like an altar from a forgotten time. The air here was heavy, charged with an electric hum that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, just a void that seemed to pulse with unseen energy. She stepped forward, her boots scuffing the ground, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. On the stone slab lay a small object, a carved wooden figure, no bigger than her hand. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs stretched too long, its face a blank, featureless oval. She reached for it, hesitating only a moment before picking it up. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, and as her fingers closed around it, the whispers erupted into a chorus. "Leave! Danger! Run!" The words were sharp, urgent, filling the air around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the figure, the clatter of it hitting the stone unnaturally loud in the silence. She spun around, eyes darting to the tree-line. There. Movement. Shadows darted between the trunks, swift and fluid, too fast to be human. Another flickered on the opposite side, then another. They circled her, indistinct shapes that seemed to melt into the gloom whenever she tried to focus on them. Her breath hitched, fear clawing up her throat. She bolted, crashing back into the forest, the whispers chasing her like a swarm. "Go back. Hurry. They're coming." The words overlapped, frantic and pleading, driving her onward. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her jacket. Roots rose up to snag her boots, as if the forest itself conspired to hold her. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop. The shadows were behind her. She could feel them, a weight pressing against her back, a presence that hungered. Panic fueled her, blurring time and distance. Just as her strength began to fail, she burst onto the main trail. The whispers vanished, snuffed out like a candle, and the forest snapped back to life. Birds sang, leaves rustled, as if nothing had happened. She didn't pause to marvel at it. She ran, her boots pounding the dirt, until the trailhead came into view, her car a beacon of safety. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. Scrambling into the driver's seat, she slammed the door and locked it, her chest heaving as she gulped air. She sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to piece together what had happened. The symbols, the whispers, the shadows, it felt like a dream, a nightmare she'd stumbled into and barely escaped. But the scratches on her arms, the mud caked on her boots, told her it was real. She started the engine, hands still trembling, and glanced in the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something, a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the lot, its blank face turned toward her. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the swaying trees. A trick of the light, she told herself, but her grip tightened on the wheel. As she drove away, the trail shrinking in her mirror, Emily's mind raced. She didn't know what she'd encountered, something ancient, something angry, something that didn't belong in her world. She'd always trusted the trail, loved its wild beauty, but now she saw its shadow, a darkness lurking beneath the surface. One thing was certain: she'd never stray from the path again. Lisa parked her car at the trailhead, the gravel crunching beneath her tires as she stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The Appalachian Trail stretched before her, a riot of red, orange, and yellow leaves carpeting the ground. The sky was a deep, clear blue, and a chill hung in the air, hinting at winter's approach. It was the perfect day for photography, and Lisa had come prepared. Her camera bag slung over her shoulder, she set off down the trail, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. This was her escape, a chance to leave behind the city's clamor and immerse herself in nature's quiet beauty. For the first hour, everything was ideal. She snapped photos of the winding path, sunlight filtering through the trees, and a squirrel darting across her view. The trail was well marked, with signs pointing to lookout points and campsites, and Lisa felt at peace, her mind focused and calm. She'd planned a 3-day hike, with plenty of stops to capture the landscape's shifting moods. But as she ventured deeper into the woods, something caught her eye, a carving on a large oak tree just off the path. It was a simple symbol, a circle with a dot in the center, freshly etched into the bark, the wood still pale where it had been stripped away. Lisa frowned. She hadn't seen any other hikers that day, and the trail was usually quiet this time of year. She stepped closer, tracing the grooves with her fingers. It didn't resemble the standard painted trail markers, those were uniform, practical. This felt different, deliberate. Maybe it was kids, she thought, or a hiker leaving a personal mark. She snapped a photo, intrigued but not yet unsettled, and continued on her way. A few hundred yards later, she spotted another symbol, similar but with 2 dots inside the circle, carved into a different tree. Then another, on a birch further ahead, this one with 3 dots. The markings seemed to form a pattern, veering off the main trail into a denser, less traveled part of the forest. Curiosity tugged at her. She'd always prided herself on knowing the trail's secrets, and this felt like a puzzle to unravel. With a glance back at the familiar path, she decided to follow the markings, confident she could retrace her steps. The forest shifted as she pressed deeper. The trees grew taller, their branches weaving a thick canopy that dimmed the sunlight to a muted glow. The air thickened, carrying a faint, metallic tang she couldn't place. The cheerful chatter of birds faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her ears. More symbols appeared, now on nearly every tree, their shapes growing intricate, circles within circles, lines twisting into spirals. They seemed to guide her onward, silent sentinels pulling her into the unknown. Then, she heard it, a soft, fleeting sound, like a whisper on the wind. She froze, tilting her head to listen. It was faint, barely audible over the rustle of leaves, but unmistakable. "Hello," she called, her voice sounding small, swallowed by the stillness. No answer came, just the whisper again, clearer now, though the words remained indistinct. Her pulse quickened. "It's just the breeze," she told herself, "or hikers nearby." She was rational, not given to superstition, but a flicker of unease crept in. Despite her instincts, she pressed forward, drawn by the whispers and the symbols. The path, more a suggestion than a trail now, grew wilder, choked with brambles that snagged at her legs. She pushed through, her boots sinking into soft earth, her breath visible in the cooling air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving around her like threads of sound. She strained to decipher them, catching fragments, her name, perhaps, or a call to follow. Her stomach tightened, but she couldn't turn back. Something compelled her, a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable pull. After what felt like hours, the trees parted, and she stumbled into a clearing. It was a perfect circle, about 20 feet across, ringed by smooth, moss-covered stones. In the center stood a flat slab of rock, weathered and ancient, like an altar from a forgotten age. The air here was heavy, charged with an electric hum that made her hair stand on end. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, just a void that pulsed with unseen energy. She stepped forward, her boots scuffing the ground, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. On the stone slab lay a small object, a carved wooden figure, no bigger than her hand. It was humanoid, but distorted, its limbs stretched too long, its face a blank, featureless oval. She reached for it, hesitating only a moment before picking it up. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, and as her fingers closed around it, the whispers erupted into a chorus. "Leave! Danger! Run!" The words were sharp, urgent, filling the air around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the figure, its clatter against the stone unnaturally loud in the silence. She spun around, eyes darting to the tree-line. There. Movement. Shadows darted between the trunks, swift and fluid, too fast to be human. Another flickered on the opposite side, then another. They circled her, indistinct shapes that melted into the gloom whenever she tried to focus. Her breath hitched, fear clawing up her throat. She bolted, crashing back into the forest, the whispers chasing her like a swarm. "Go back. Hurry. They're coming." The words overlapped, frantic and pleading, driving her onward. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her jacket, roots rose to snag her boots, as if the forest conspired to hold her. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop. The shadows were behind her, she could feel them, a weight pressing against her back, a presence that hungered. Panic fueled her, blurring time and distance. Just as her strength began to fail, she burst onto the main trail. The whispers vanished, snuffed out like a candle, and the forest snapped back to life. Birds sang, leaves rustled, as if nothing had happened. She didn't pause to marvel. She ran, her boots pounding the dirt, until the trailhead came into view, her car a beacon of safety. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. Scrambling into the driver's seat, she slammed the door and locked it, her chest heaving as she gulped air. She sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had happened. The symbols, the whispers, the shadows, it felt like a nightmare she'd stumbled into and barely escaped. But the scratches on her arms, the mud on her boots, told her it was real. She started the engine, hands still trembling, and glanced in the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something, a tall, thin figure at the edge of the lot, its blank face turned toward her. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the swaying trees. A trick of the light, she told herself, but her grip tightened on the wheel. As she drove away, the trail shrinking in her mirror, Lisa's mind raced. She didn't know what she'd encountered, something ancient, something angry, something not of her world. She'd always trusted the trail, loved its wild beauty, but now she saw its shadow, a darkness lurking beneath. One thing was certain, she'd never stray from the path again. The Appalachian Trail stretched like a vein through the heart of the wilderness, its paths winding through ancient forests that held secrets older than the mountains themselves. For John the ranger, Mark the firefighter, Sarah the teacher, Emily the hiker, and Lisa the photographer, the trail had been a place of solace, adventure, and escape, until it wasn't. Each had encountered something inexplicable, a flickering lantern in the dark, a figure vanishing into the fog, whispers luring them off the path, shadows that moved with purpose, and carvings that seemed to pulse with intent. Their stories, though separate, wove together like threads in a tapestry, hinting at a presence within the trail that watched, waited, and chose who to reveal itself to. This final chapter brings their paths together, not in person, but through the shared weight of what they'd seen, and what they could never unsee. It was a crisp November evening when the five gathered, not by plan, but by chance, at a small diner just off the highway near the trail's southern end. The place was a haven for hikers and locals, its walls lined with faded photos of the mountains and handwritten notes from travelers. John sat at the counter, nursing a black coffee, his ranger hat resting beside him. Mark occupied a corner booth, his eyes scanning a newspaper he wasn't really reading. Sarah was at a table by the window, her journal open, pen hovering as she tried to make sense of her ordeal. Emily and Lisa, strangers until that moment, shared a table near the door, drawn together by a shared unease they couldn't quite name. The air in the diner was warm, but a chill lingered, as if the forest had followed them inside. John was the first to break the silence. He'd overheard Emily and Lisa talking in hushed tones about strange carvings and whispers in the woods. His jaw tightened as he turned in his stool, catching their eyes. "You saw them too, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "The symbols. The lights. Something out there that doesn't belong." The diner seemed to hush, the clink of dishes fading as the others leaned in. Emily nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug. "I thought I was losing it," she admitted. "But those whispers, they knew my name." Sarah looked up from her journal, her face pale. "I heard them too. And I saw something. Shadows that moved like they were alive." Mark set his newspaper down, his firefighter's instincts kicking in. "I saw a figure in the fog," he said, his voice gruff. "No face, no sound, just standing there, watching. And then it was gone." Lisa clutched her camera, her knuckles white. "I found a wooden figure, carved, wrong. And the symbols on the trees, they led me somewhere I wasn't supposed to go." The group fell silent, each grappling with the weight of their shared experiences. They hadn't known each other before tonight, but the trail had marked them, bound them in a way that defied explanation. John leaned forward, his ranger's authority softened by the tremor in his voice. "I've patrolled these trails for years. I've seen bears, storms, lost hikers, but nothing like this. That lantern I found, it wasn't lit by anyone human. I'm sure of it." The diner's fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The waitress, a wiry woman with graying hair, approached their tables, her eyes narrowing. "You folks talking about the trail?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've lived here my whole life. Heard stories like yours since I was a kid. The old folks called it the Trails Keeper, something that's been here longer than us, watching, deciding who gets to leave." Mark scoffed, but his bravado faltered. "You're saying it's some kind of ghost?" The waitress shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Ghost, spirit, something else, don't matter what you call it. It's older than these mountains. Some say it's tied to the land, to the stones and the trees. It don't like trespassers, but it don't always hurt him either. Sometimes it just plays." Sarah shivered, her journal forgotten. "Plays?" "It felt like it wanted me to stay out there, like it was pulling me deeper." Lisa nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I felt it too. Like it was testing me, seeing how far I'd go." Emily crossed her arms, her face set. "I'm never going back. Whatever it is, it's not friendly." John shook his head. "I can't stop going back. It's my job. But now, every time I patrol at night, I feel it. A flicker in the trees, a whisper when there's no wind. It's always there, just out of sight." The group exchanged glances, the weight of their shared truth settling over them like a fog. They weren't crazy. They weren't alone. But that knowledge brought little comfort. The waitress leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "There's a story my gran used to tell. Long ago, before the trail was even a trail, people lived here, folks who knew the land's secrets. They left offerings, carved symbols to keep the keeper at bay. But when settlers came, they ignored the old ways, built where they shouldn't, walked where they weren't welcome. The keeper never forgave that. Those symbols you saw? They're warnings, but they're also invitations. It wants you to see it, to know it's there." Mark's jaw tightened. "So what do we do? Just stay away?" The waitress gave a grim smile. "You can try. But the trail has a way of calling you back. Always does." The group sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Outside, the night pressed against the diner's windows, the darkness alive with unseen eyes. Lisa broke the tension, pulling her camera from her bag. "I took pictures of the symbols," she said, scrolling through her photos. She froze, her face draining of color. "They're gone. Every photo I took out there, it's just blank." Emily's breath caught. "I tried sketching what I saw, the figure in the clearing. My notebook's empty now, like the pages were wiped clean." Sarah opened her journal, her hands trembling. The words she'd written about the whispers, the shadows, they were gone, replaced by blank pages. John and Mark exchanged a look, their unease mirrored in each other's eyes. Whatever they'd encountered, it didn't want to be remembered. The diner's lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the room into a momentary blackout. When they blinked back on, the waitress was gone, her apron neatly folded on the counter. The group stared at it, a chill creeping up their spines. Had she been there at all? Or was she part of the trail's strange pull, another piece of its endless game? They left the diner together, stepping into the cold night. The parking lot was empty, the forest looming across the road, its shadows shifting in the moonlight. They didn't speak as they parted ways, each heading to their cars, their lives, their separate worlds. But they all felt it, the trail's pull, a whisper in the back of their minds, urging them to return. Months passed. John kept patrolling, though he stuck to daylight hours, his flashlight always at the ready. Mark traded hiking for city walks, but the fog followed him, a haze in his dreams' bridges. Sarah burned her journal, teaching her students about the safety of known paths. Emily sold her gear, vowing never to set foot in the wilderness again. Lisa's camera stayed untouched, the blank photos a reminder of what she'd lost. Yet the trail never let go. In quiet moments, each of them would pause, hearing a faint whisper, seeing a flicker in the corner of their eye. The Appalachian Trail was more than a path through the mountains, it was alive, ancient, and patient. And somewhere deep in its heart, the keeper waited, its carvings and shadows ready for the next soul to wander too far. The trail was beautiful, wild, and unforgiving, and it always had the last word.